Friends, our scripture lesson is taken from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. Nelson, could you put that on the screen? There you go. Thanks. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say it is going to rain, and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Well, I remember, when I was a kid and we went to a restaurant, I remember the first time my mother ever sent a dish back. I don't know how many of you do that. How many of you are, if you don't like the food you send it back to the kitchen people? Not too many? Wow, okay. All right. Well, I remember my mother did that, and I think I was a teenager, and of course, when you're a teenager, everything your parents do mortifies you. All right, so it doesn't really matter. So everything your parents do mortifies you. But I remember my mom, we order this food, and it wasn't like there was a hair in it, or a dead bug or something like that. It was just that it was just bad. And she sends it back, and I'm absolutely mortified that she would do that, okay? But I remember what she said to me. She's like, look, it's my money, and I have a right to enjoy what I spend my money on. And that stuck with me, all right? I remember that to this day. Now, the question is, do we put up with what's wrong, or do we decide to say something and do something about it? Do we want to avoid making trouble, or do we risk conflict, all right? These are questions that we face so often in our everyday lives. And in this passage, Jesus says something which is kind of interesting. He says, do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. Now, we're going to explain this in a second. But we often think that being Christian means being a doormat, all right? Sometimes we get taught that if you're a Christian, all right, never cause conflict, always, just take it. And I remember one of my favorite baseball players was a pitcher named Orel Hershiser. He pitched for the Dodgers, and he was a very devout Christian. In fact, he used to talk about the fact that when he was on the mound in a pressure situation like the World Series, he would sing hymns to himself on the mound to calm down. He also had a reputation that if a batter crowded the plate, he would buzz one right by your head. All right? And someone asked him, how do you reconcile your willingness to do that with your Christian faith? And I loved his answer. He said, just because I'm a Christian don't mean I'm a wimp. All right? And so he did that. Now, this statement of Jesus is a pretty confrontational statement. But this doesn't mean that Jesus actually came for the purpose of causing division. There's a subtlety in the Greek which is important. There's these connectors, all right, in language. And there's a very important one in Greek called hina. So if you hear scholars talk about a passage, they'll say this was a hina clause. Hina is a connector that means in order that, all right? It means that's the purpose. And so when it's a hina clause, you're saying that I did A in order that B would happen. I did A for the purpose of causing B to happen, all right? And that's a very common connector that happens in the scriptures. This particular phrase is haughty, not hina. The haughty connector means that this result may happen, but it's not necessarily the intended result, all right? It's not why. It's not the why. It's just something that you might reasonably understand may happen as a result of doing it. So doing A may cause B, and you understand that. But when it's a haughty clause, not a hina clause, you're not saying that B is the reason for doing A. You're simply acknowledging that doing A may cause B to result. All right? And so Jesus is saying that his ministry may cause division. There may be division that results from his ministry. The purpose of his ministry was not to cause division, but it was an acceptable price to pay. That in order to do ministry, it might cause division, and this was acceptable. We do this all the time. For example, in our congregation here, our stance on inclusion is a haughty clause. We don't take that stance that we have on inclusion. We don't take the stance on being a part of a denomination that is open and affirming and welcoming to all, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender identity, regardless of their sexual orientation. All right, we don't take that stand for the purpose of causing division. But if it does, that's okay. It may risk division, but that's okay because it's what we believe, it's what we stand for, it's who we are. And so Jesus is saying that as he does his ministry, okay, division may result. Division may happen. And that's okay. And so these divisions are going to hit these primary relationships inside families. Now, it's easy to look at that whole passage and joke about people not getting along with their mother-in-law, right? So if you don't get along with, if you don't get along with your mother-in-law, you can go, well, it's biblical. Jesus said so. Okay. All right. But the thing here is that these are primary relationships that he's describing, right? Parents and children. And one of the things that I think they have in common, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, all right, is that he doesn't mention like siblings, all right? And the thing about it is I think these primary relationships tend to have these parental, parent-child relationships. My experience of them is that there's a stronger tendency there to want conformity. All right? Like, as you're a kid, you don't want your parent to stand out. You don't want your kid to be weird. You don't want your parent to do things, all right? And your parents are the ones who react if you tell them that you are interested in having, say, a non-standard career. All right? Okay? Your siblings don't care. All right? You tell your sibling that you want to go off and join the circus, and your sibling says, "Can I have your room?" All right? They don't really mind. All right? But that's a much tougher conversation to have with a parent. There's this tendency toward conformity in those parent-child, child-parent relationships. And the teachings of Jesus run contrary to cultural expectations in many ways. All right? Love your enemies is a countercultural teaching. Forgive everyone is a countercultural teaching. All right? Turn the other cheek is a countercultural teaching. All right? And parents especially, I know my parents, when you talked about those kinds of things, my parents above all wanted to protect me. All right? They above all wanted me to look out for me. They wanted to make sure that I stayed safe. They were really careful about doing that. They wanted to protect us. And they also wanted me to stay in the confines of a faith that was socially acceptable, all right? So we have to ask ourselves the question, when do we take a stand? When do we do it? When do we decide to go counter to culture and risk offending people around us? You don't want to do it on everything, right? We know people who do it on everything. And the people who do it on everything actually lose all their effectiveness because they just become that person, and no one wants to listen to them. But when do we make that choice, right? Sometimes the people around us don't even understand the choice that we would make to stand up for our principles. For example, some of you may have worked in companies. Some of you may have had a boss who wouldn't understand if you had ethics. All they understood was make the sale, right? Or don't tell the customer about the problem. Don't worry about a customer who wants to buy something that you clearly know won't meet their needs. Just make the sale, right? So some bosses don't get it, some companies don't get it. And this is something that we often deal with in the world, that unprincipled people, unethical people often can't relate to principles because it's not their universe. It's not the way they think. They don't understand it. And so when you take a principled stand, they're like, what? What are you doing? All right? A dishonest salesperson doesn't understand an honest one. A dishonest salesperson watches an honest salesperson let a potential sale walk out the door because they were honest with the customer, and they're like, what are they doing? They don't get it. And so you find yourself actually being on the receiving end of criticism for taking a principled stand. But when we do this, we have to be self-aware enough to know what our motivations are in doing it. Because we've all met people who take the stand and it feels a lot more like their ego talking than their principles talking. All right? And we have to understand our own motivations so that we can discern when it's our principles and when it's our ego that's causing us to do that. And the principles that Jesus teaches us help us discern that difference. I mean, when we draw the line, we just have to ask ourselves, what would Jesus want me to do in this circumstance? Jesus doesn't rule out division, but grandstanding also isn't Christian. So we have to really ask ourselves, is it our ethics or our ego that's talking in this circumstance? Now, when the stakes are low, it's easy to talk about, what you believe. I mean, for example, Jesus gives this example in this passage. He says, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say it's going to rain, and so it happens. We all know this, right? Nothing is easier to discuss than the weather. All right. In the announcements, in the opening, I talked about how much I don't like the hot weather. All right. Maybe some of you love it. Okay. But rare is the person who would quit the church over it. They're not going to sit there and go, I'm never going back to that church. The pastor does not like 90-degree weather, and I can't go to a church where the pastor doesn't like heat. All right, it's not going to happen. So it's an opinion, but it's an extraordinarily low-risk opinion to state. Wait, as a prop, some of you are supposed to stand up and walk out at that point. But anyway, that would be funny. But that's the thing, okay? It's easy to state low-risk opinions. That's what cocktail party conversation is about, right? The weather, maybe your hobbies. And one of the things that we were always taught, right, was don't discuss politics or religion, okay? And in some contexts, sure. But you know what? Maybe our principles will require us in various circumstances to discuss either of those things. So when we were taught, don't discuss politics or religion because it might be divisive, there will also be times when your principles absolutely require that you talk about politics or religion, even at the risk of conflict. Okay. We have to be willing to talk about both when it's authentic to who we are. And authenticity is always going to risk conflict. Being true to who we are will risk conflict. Sometimes we compromise what we believe, but eventually we have to be true to ourselves, even at the risk of relational damage. Right? And when you do that, sometimes people will say, well, you caused the damage by speaking up. And the answer is no, you didn't cause the damage by speaking up. You were simply true to yourself. And then it's a matter of whether the other person is able to deal with it or not. All right? For example, there was a great statement that I heard, and this is one of those things where I read it somewhere, I remembered it, and I have no idea where I read it or who said it first. So I don't even know if the person I was reading it from was saying it, had learned it from somebody else. I have no idea. So I'm just saying that as a preface to say that I'm using a quote that I do not understand the provenance of. I just want you to know that it's not me who came up with this. But it was a person who said that, look, Jesus said, turn the other cheek, not turn the other way. All right? And what this means is that when you turn the other cheek, when someone offended you, someone hit you, and you turn the other cheek, you are simply making the statement, I'm not going to engage on your terms. You're attempting to start a physical fight with me. You have struck me, you are attempting to start a physical fight with me, and I'm not going to engage with you in that way. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to engage in violence that you are attempting to instigate. But it also, as you imagine that scene, it also does not disengage you from that person. You're still standing there, okay? You didn't turn away and run. You didn't say, I refuse to relate to you, I'm going to leave. You didn't do that either. Turning the other cheek is remaining engaged with the person just on the terms of your principles, which say, I will not fight you. I will not engage in violence with you. Those are my terms for engaging with you, but I'm not going to turn away. And really, that refusal to disengage, the willingness to both stand up for the way in which you will engage someone, but refuse to disengage from them, actually makes a better relationship possible. You know, years later, it's always the case, right? It's decades later that you understand how right your parents were. Okay? And what I came to understand when I was mortified as a kid with my mom sending the meal back in the restaurant actually makes a relationship with the restaurant possible. Because if you don't send it back, what will happen? You never go back. Your memory of the restaurant is, I went there, I ordered a dish, it was awful, I didn't say anything, I paid my bill, I left a customary tip, and I left, and I'm never going back to that restaurant. Risking the conflict by sending the food back actually makes it possible that they can hold you as a customer, right? That actually makes it possible. They may sit there and they may remake the dish for you and it may be perfect. Or they may offer you something else. Or just the way they politely and kindly respond to your dissatisfaction can turn you from being an unhappy diner in that moment into a regular customer of that restaurant. They may keep you as a customer for life because you spoke up and said something. The authenticity in the moment actually makes a continuing relationship possible, as opposed to turning away and severing that relationship forever. You know, in small group work, when you talk about the development of groups of people getting together, there's work that's been done for the last 60 years, and there was a Professor Tuckman, who was writing on stages of group development in the 60s. And he described 4 stages of group development, which are actually still taught and used to this day, both in the secular world and in churches when they talk about how groups form and get together. And he said that the 4 stages are form, storm, norm, and perform. See, that form stage is when pleasantries abound. You just get together, you don't know everybody, you're gathered in the room, and you go around and you introduce one another, and everybody just sits there and says, oh yeah, my name is so-and-so, I live in such and such a town, and I've got, they describe maybe their family, they describe their pets, something like that, okay? Very non-threatening pleasantries. But the critical stage is actually storm. That's when you actually start to find out what they really think. It's when you start to find out who they really are. When you start to find out the opinions they really hold. And then there is friction in the group. And the key to that stage is people who stay with it. Right? They stay with the group despite the friction. They stay in relationship. They don't turn away. They don't leave. They don't say, I'm never coming back. But they stay in relationship through the storm. And then when you get past the storm, you get to a stage he calls norm. Norming is when now you really are getting to know one another. You know one another, and now you're really figuring out what the authentic relationships are in the group. You're getting to know one another and getting to become cohesive as a group despite the differences that you have. And then you can get to perform. Then the group really starts to move forward because you understand that you can be real with the other people in the group. You understand that you can be authentic with the people in the group, and then the group is actually performing because you're not tiptoeing around issues, but rather you're able to be genuine. I remember, one of the series I've mentioned that I really enjoyed, I rewatch it all the time, How I Met Your Mother, this sitcom, and there was one episode they had where they were talking about this couple that had just started to date, and they described the fact that when you're in the early stages of a relationship, you say yes to anything the other person suggests. All right? Person sits there and says, let's go see this new movie, and it's like the absolute movie you would least ever want to go to on your own, whatever it can be, maybe you hate rom-coms or you hate Marvel or whatever it is, you don't want to go, but they go, let's go see that movie, and you go, okay, sure, all right. Or let's go play mini golf, and you despise mini golf, but you go, all right? And that's the early stages. And it's only when one of them finally has the courage to say, no, I really don't want to do that. No, that's really not my thing. That you actually begin to understand that the relationship has taken a huge step forward. That the person actually trusts the relationship enough to be able to say to the other person, I don't want to do that. That's not my thing. Can we do something else? And that's such an important stage for a relationship to get to, because now it's a relationship based in your authentic self. And Jesus says to the people, how is it that you were able to be so authentic in talking about the low-risk stuff like the weather, that when you see the sky or whatever and you go, oh yeah, it's going to rain, how can you be so authentic when you're talking about low-risk stuff and not be authentic when it's important? And so he says, you hypocrites. Hypocrite, by the way, comes from a Greek word that refers to actors in the old days. They would wear masks that represented the characters that they were playing, okay? And so hypokrisos is a word that actually just refers to that. It refers to being under a mask, all right? And so that's what a hypocrite is in Greek. It's a person wearing a mask covering up their real self. She says, you hypocrites. You can interpret the earth and the sky. You can interpret the weather. But why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Not just understand the time, but when we interpret things, we interpret to others, right? To understand it and be willing to speak of it. Why are we not willing to speak of what we see in the present time with the same ease with which we would speak of the weather? The present time of Jesus was a time of a call to new principles, a time of a call to a new way of being, a time of a call to reject the ways that the Roman Empire operated, to reject the ways that the religious hierarchy operated, and to be called to a new thing with new principles, to be called to a new way of being. And the willingness to speak authentically into that new time was critical, even at the risk of division, even at the risk of being separated from those who wouldn't understand your newfound principles. And the reward is deeper relationships. See, when you stand on principle, some will applaud you and some will not. And that's the division. But the reward, as you live into your Christian principles and you risk alienating some who don't understand why you would do this, the reward is deeper relationships with those who will accept you as you truly are and will accept you as your full, authentic self. The deeper relationship that is possible with people around whom you no longer have to tiptoe on important issues is worth the risk of alienating those who won't understand what you're doing or why. And by the way, accepting you doesn't mean that they agree with you, right? You can have very authentic relationships and not agree, and that's fine. The authenticity is that they can bring their authentic self to the relationship, you bring your authentic self to the relationship, and you decide that you are going to remain in relationship, accepting the other in their authentic self, even as you continue to authentically disagree on whatever it is you disagree about. But our faith is integral to who we are, and it needs to be a part of our authentic self. Right? It's not just something we believe. Our faith is not just something that sits over here and you can say whether or not you believe in that. All right? But rather, your faith has to be an integral part of who you are, or else it doesn't work. It's not something external to you that you choose to accept the propositions of or not. Rather, it is either something that becomes a part of you or it isn't. And when it becomes a part of who you are, when it becomes integral to who you see yourself as being, then when you don't live into it, when you feel the need to mask it, when you feel the need to hide it, when you don't speak up about it, you're actually sacrificing a part of who you are. You're not allowing yourself to be fully authentic in your relationships if the faith has become an integral part of who you are, and then you hide it. So we need to be willing to speak of our faith and speak particularly of the principles for life that our faith engenders within us as an integral part of who we are. This is what we believe. This is who we are. This is how we think you should go through the world. And speak of it in that way. And the vast majority of people will actually respect you for it, even if they don't agree. I have wonderful interfaith relationships. All right? I have wonderful interfaith relationships with people of various faiths. In fact, I've had such great relationships with clergy of vastly different faith traditions. And we all come into it fully believing what we believe from our respective faith traditions, and we don't believe, in the same things. But we still can have wonderfully authentic relationships where we come to them in the fullness of who we are. All right? Imams, rabbis, They don't expect me to leave my Christianity at the door when I relate to them, and I don't expect them to proclaim Jesus as the Messiah. That's not their tradition. That's not what they believe. It is what I believe with all my heart and with all my soul, and we authentically can come together and work together and respect one another without agreeing. The vast majority of people can actually do that. The vast majority of people will actually respect you as your authentic self. And those are the ones who matter because they fundamentally respect who you are. And you don't have to hide a part of yourself to be in relationship with them. And that's the kind of relationship we need in the world. Amen.